this time he is not going to bother with the good people.
Wheels off.
He's basically
That's right.
told us that, and people are surprised. I understand that there are some heavyweight Republicans, like RNC members, I'm told, are in Florida, and they're horrified. It's like, excuse me, dude, this is what I have been telling you since 2018. But hey,
if you're horrified and surprised, your judgment is deeply suspect.
You are either lying or engaged in deep self-deception.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to George Conway Explains It All to Sarah. I'm Sarah Longwell, publisher of The Bulwark, and because I'm not a lawyer, I've asked my good friend George Conway from the Society for the Rule of Law to explain the legal and, other news that is more technical to me and to you. George,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm actually, we've had sort of like a dearth of specifically legal news, but now I'm super excited because I have some like legit questions about what in God's name is happening right now. We have this weird couple of days where like the first cabinet appointments came out and it was like, okay, Rubio for state. Like, I'll live with that. Craven, spineless, but not an unserious person entirely or somebody without any experience.
No, he's a complete chameleon, but what else you got in the Republican Party?
Yeah, right. Like that was like to be expected.
Right.
And then he did like Stefanik, and it's like, she's the worst, but also, again, a smart person who once was normal.
Right.
So, okay, fine. That's where we are. And then the crazy ones started to roll in. The first one we got was Pete Hegseth, Fox News morning host, who is now going to oversee
What's your problem with him?
the largest bureaucracy in America. I don't know.
The largest employer in America, yeah. Maybe the largest employer in the world. Actually.
Yeah, the American military.
Yes.
He's going to do it with the experience of a weekend news show host. I don't know.
He was a major in the Army, I guess it was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that usually the kind of experience one sees for this role?
No. I mean, a guy like him, I think, would normally... I think it's possible for a guy like him to get a job at the Pentagon, but probably his role, he would be press secretary at the Pentagon. That would be something he might be qualified for, even though he's completely off the wall. Or you could make him undersecretary of something or other. He's about that age, and then if he does a good job at the Pentagon and as undersecretary of kumquat distribution or whatever it would be, then, if you wait later into the administration, you might get to be deputy secretary of defense. And then maybe in the last year of the administration, he could become acting secretary of defense. That would be actually a reasonable course for somebody with like his, who's sort of politically involved, but never run anything in Washington, but has some kind of an in or, with the president or with his administration. Do you think that's reasonable? Could be.
I think that's a good, look, I saw this nomination and I thought, well, that's silly, but also sort of to be expected, right? Like the idea that Fox News talent personalities were going to end up in big jobs seemed not insane, not crazy.
But something, it's like, he's not even the weekday anchor.
No, that's right. He's not even like the regular Fox and Friends. He's just like the weekend Fox and Friends.
He's weekend. It's like,
Yeah.
But,
okay.
But I guess Trump watches that before he goes out and plays golf. So
sure.
Yeah.
Like these are the people Trump knows and thinks of and who he knows which hosts are always on his side and always have his back. And I suspect Pete is one of those.
Yeah. And that's essentially how Trump is picking nominees.
Right.
It seems.
Yes.
He wants pliancy. And this is not something that we didn't predict. We have been saying this. Hello, American people. This is what we have been saying.
Sure.
And it's a function of his narcissism, if you'll permit me to go back to one of my favorite subjects. His narcissism during the first term, in so far as appointments were concerned, led him to actually appoint some people who were highly qualified.
Yes.
Because one of the things that narcissists like to do is to associate themselves with impressive or highly credentialed people. And Donald Trump actually loved surrounding himself, or loved formerly surrounding himself with Ivy League types, for example. And I remember I was considered for Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Division of the United States Department of Justice. And I went through a background check.
Even though you didn't have a television show?
Right. No, this was remember, he appointed Rex Tillerson, who was, who, although he didn't have government experience, had a great deal of international experience because he ran one of the world's largest oil company. And so he had to, he actually understood how the planet worked and how different governments worked, and particularly in sensitive areas of the world, because, the Russians have a lot of oil, and the Middle East, there's a lot of oil. It was not a crazy pick. And, and there were a lot of other good. I mean, he had, who was the guy, the Goldman Sachs guy, who was, I guess, the
Mnuchin?
national, what?
Not Treasury. Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the guy who was he was in the White House, National Economic Advisor. I forget. But he used to take stuff. He was at Goldman Sachs. But anyway, he had a bunch. He had a lot of decent people. In fact, as I mentioned, I went through a background check, and the FBI interviewed the federal circuit judge I had clerked for, who was a Yale law professor. And the FBI agent, was satisfied with the answers my judge got. And then they chatted. And apparently the FBI agent, who was doing a number of these background checks, said, Trump is appointing some pretty good people. And he was. There were actually good. Now, the libs may not have liked some of them. For example, Jeff Sessions, right? The liberals did not like Jeff Sessions, but he was a perfectly reasonable, a United States senator who had been a prosecutor, and who was, he basically was an honorable guy. I wouldn't say he's perfect, but he was an honorable guy. He was respected in the Senate, and that was good. So he had a lot of decent people in his administration, and that didn't work out so well for him.
Yeah.
Because those people understood things that he did not, and cared about things like the law and policy, things that he did not care about. And they would tell him he was wrong. They would sometimes take papers off his desk. I think the Goldman Sachs guy did that, whose name I
certainly Mattis did it. It was like
they would do all sorts of things, and and they'd meet with him, and they'd kind of humor him, or they push back more than he would like, and it would annoy him, or they'd humor him, and then they'd walk out and they'd say, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? Like, the famous Rex Tillerson line, which I don't think he's ever denied. But he basically said that the president was a fucking moron after a meeting in the White House. And, which led Mitch McConnell apparently to joke during Senate lunches, like, it isn't true that Rex Tillerson called president a moron. He called him a fucking moron. And so, basically you had a bunch of people who, and, John Bolton, people, there are lots of reasons that a lot of people don't like John Bolton. He's too much of a hawk for most foreign policy types, and certainly for Democrats, and even now for Trump. But he's a smart guy, Yale Law School graduate, Covington and Burling partner, who was head of the Civil Division of the United States Department of Justice, and also had foreign policy chops. This guy's a smart guy. And by the way, he commented yesterday, he commented that, gosh, he thought the worst appointment ever made in the history of the United States by a president or a president-elect was Tulsi Gabbard. And then an hour later, here comes Gaetz.
Well,
So
now
anyway,
you've gotten, hold on, you preempted because I was, I wanted to get through all of these
okay, let
picks,
me
but
finish. Let me finish the point that I started meandering off on.
okay.
So anyway, in his first term, the narcissism led him to appoint smart people and good people who frustrated him because they were smarter than he was. They knew he was smarter than they was. He knew they were smarter than he was. And that's why they all didn't last. They either fired them, they resigned, and then he calls them blithering idiots like Bolton. And that's why basically very few of his cabinet officials supported him this year, the former cabinet officials. So that kind of, so that narcissism that led him to appoint decent people, he's off that now. So his narcissism now, he has learned like he needs just to appoint people who are just going to suck up to him, tell him he's great, and never contradict him, and be completely compliant. And that's how he can exercise control over the government and also satisfy his narcissistic urge to be obeyed and praised. And so basically, it's a sycophants, okay, and the completely the chameleons like Marco Rubio. Those are the people he's appointing. So he's sitting in Mar-a-Lago, apparently, reportedly, with a TV screen, in front of a TV screen. The War Room has a big TV screen, and he's watching television appearances of potential candidates. And that's how he's picking people.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was my point about his narcissism.
There's this thing, right? When we got to Pete Hegseth, I was like, okay, so now we're going to get some of Trump's clowns. And I knew, we knew there were going to be some clowns, but I wouldn't say that's like alarming. But the Tulsi, Matt Gaetz picks are like, these are alarming.
Those are off the charts. It's like, remember Chernobyl? I don't know if you ever read books about Chernobyl
I watched the HBO miniseries.
The HBO miniseries, and they're going around with the Geiger counters, and it's like, 3 Rontgen. It's like, no. It's off the scale. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, you're going to die in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
These are off the scale bad. And
okay. So let's just talk to me about why Tulsi, the Russian stooge pipeline to Putin, tell me why she's so bad as the pick for national security.
Yeah, I mean, lots of people have kind of assumed over the years that she is pro-Russian. And some people have suggested that she is a Russian asset. I don't know whether that's true, but from having my limited experience watching her, there's nothing to indicate that that's not true, which is sort of an amazing thing. Right.
Like if you were a Russian stooge, you wouldn't act any differently than Tulsi Gabbard behaves.
Right. Yes. Right. Correct. I mean, I have a friend who is in a sports business, and he has a lot of friends in Ukraine. And he told me just the other day that in his Telegram chats with his Ukrainian friends, they are horrified. I mean, last night they told me that they're absolutely horrified. They think basically that what's going to happen is that their operational plans are going to go straight to the Russians now, the ones that are in the possession of the United States government.
Right.
And they feel, not only that they're going to get cut off, the funding's going to get cut off, but they're paranoid about, whether or not basically they're now exposed from an intelligence standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, the extent to which this has just bigger, broader national security considerations around other countries being able to trust us.
Yeah, no, this election is a geopolitical calamity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, but then now I want to do Matt Gaetz, because even Tulsi Gabbard, while an insane choice, none of it felt as insane as taking the most loathed congressman in Congress, who has been leading these efforts to oust, Kevin McCarthy or whatever, who is under congressional investigation on something that was about to drop in just 2 days. Right? He has been credibly accused of many, what would amount to underage sex trafficking, which, as I recall from the right, it's a huge concern of theirs. I think the whole QAnon thing, not a QAnon expert, but I do feel like sex trafficking of minors was very much at the center of that. So it seems like he would maybe be a bad choice, but it seems like he was chosen because he has been a stalwart supporter of Trump, defended his crimes, and is a criminal himself.
Look, I disagree with the conventional wisdom about Matt Gaetz. I think he is, and I said this on CNN last night, I think he's the perfect nominee for Donald Trump.
Tell me more. Yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, because Donald Trump, let's say he's a convicted criminal. He is an adjudicated sex offender. He was found civilly to have digitally penetrated a woman forcibly in a department store dressing room. And, Matt Gaetz has great experience in criminal law. He never really practiced law. He certainly didn't practice criminal law. I think he practiced civil law in a rinky-dink law firm in Florida somewhere for a year maybe before he ran for the Florida House or something or other. His experience has been being investigated as a potential miscreant, potential sex trafficker, as you say. So, he's actually, because of his loyalty to Trump and because he wants to seek revenge in the way that Trump does, he's absolutely the perfect pick for Donald Trump. And, everybody who was surprised about that pick is like, I find it surprising that they could be surprised. There's nothing surprising about this pick, although I'll qualify it in the following respect. Yesterday, I happened to be in your offices for a meeting, and we were talking about the nominations, the people in the meeting. And I had pointed out that I had seen a tweet that said that Lauren Boebert had been appointed, or that Trump was intending to nominate her to be Secretary of Education. And, I looked at that and I said, is this real? And I had to do a little scrolling to figure out, no, it is not real. But I thought it was very funny. So we're sitting there during the meeting, and the person next to me, Congresswoman Barbara, former Congresswoman Comstock, says, oh, I just see something, Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. And we're like, oh, that could be just another joke. But also, it might not be. So I had to go through the whole scrolling exercise again. And lo and behold, this was real. And I don't think it's any more or less absurd than at least Lauren Boebert. I mean, she could be the specialist in sex education. As could Gaetz. Gaetz might get, but, so in that sense, it was, you had to see it to believe it, but it's not surprising in the least.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's somehow these are the shocked but not surprised moments. But I actually really agree with you. I have been very annoyed at the Republicans who support Trump but want to remain, respectable, who are like, well, this is a real, unforced error by Trump. I'm like, yeah.
Where have you been?
Yeah. Spare me. Okay. This
is everything. We were saying this time he is not going to bother with the good people.
Wheels off.
He's basically told us that. And people are surprised. I understand that there are some heavyweight Republicans, like RNC members, I'm told, are in Florida, and they're horrified. It's like, excuse me, and there's one I know actually, and I heard that he was horrified, and it's like, dude, I've been telling, I want to call him up and say, dude, this is what I have been telling you since 2018. But hey,
if you're horrified and surprised, you're just your judgment is deeply suspect.
You have been engaging. You are either lying or have engaged in deep self-deception.
Exactly. Okay, I want to read an ad, and then I want to talk. We're gonna pay some bills, but then I want to talk about how in this new world, what does it mean for confirming some of these picks? But first, our sponsor today is The Perfect Gene. George, this is the season to get the perfect gene because the cold is officially here.
I mean, I could stand up and show you my butt and how good they look, but I'm not going to do that.
Okay, well, I'm sure that there are people in our audience who would enjoy that. It's not for me, but that's, you and I have a
We have different,
yeah.
actually, we like the same thing.
So, okay. And just like if you're uncomfortable right now, these jeans will make you as comfortable as possible. These jeans fit like they were custom made, stretch like you wouldn't believe, and look fantastic. This fabric is oh so soft and yet incredibly durable. These jeans have enough stretch to accommodate Thanksgiving dinner and are comfy enough to wear all day watching Sunday football. Plus, even though they feel like sweatpants, they look good enough to be your go-to pants for date night. Perfect Jean also has a seriously massive range of sizes with 6 fits, waist sizes from 26 to 50 and lengths 26 to 38. I don't understand men's sizes, but that sounds good. You can find the perfect fit for the body you're rocking. For a limited time, our listeners get 15% off their first order plus free shipping at theperfectjean.nyc or Google The Perfect Jean and use code AskGeorge15 for 15% off.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in a personal comment here, which I do when I have used and really like a product. I haven't gotten around to using all the products, but this one I did. I used to use these. I used to buy Levi's, and I had several Levi's. I have not worn those since we started this podcast because I love the Perfect Jeans so much. They're so superior. They're so comfortable. And I wear them sometimes with suit jackets and such.
And you look great. I see at those meetings, you look great.
Thank you.
Our listeners get 15% off your first order, plus free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges when you use the code AskGeorge15 at checkout. So go to theperfectjean.nyc. That's 15% off for new customers at theperfectjean.nyc with promo code AskGeorge15. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. F your khakis and get the Perfect Jean. Okay, next, George. So this is one of those issues where, whenever you've got a situation where I understand how the normal senatorial process works, right? There's just some basics. There are 3 branches of government. They're supposed to have equal power. And so Senate's job is to advise and consent when it comes to the picks the president makes for these cabinet positions. But Trump, understanding that he has made some real controversial picks, has now been demanding. And there was a race for Senate leadership because Mitch McConnell's no longer going to be the majority leader. So they were having a race for Senate leadership. Thune won, senator, a decent guy. But they all, in the process of running, it was like Rick Scott, Thune, and Cornyn, they were all saying, yeah, we'll do recess appointments and abdicate our role in advise and consent and basically give up our power. But can you explain recess appointments to me, how this works?
Yes. Once upon a time, the United States was much smaller than it was today, and it had a lot fewer people. And it did, contrary to what Donald Trump says, it did not have Revolutionary War airports. People, if you were the senator from Massachusetts, you'd have to basically get on your horse in Boston, or horse-drawn carriage. I don't know how they did it. They didn't have trains or planes or automobiles. And, it'd take a couple days to go back to Washington, D.C. So, they didn't. And also there was just less stuff to do. People weren't as busy. We weren't regulating as much. It was a nice, young, quiet country with a lot of real estate. Donald Trump would have appreciated that. And so what the framers did was they wanted the Senate to be a check on the president's appointment power. And so they said that for the heads of departments and other positions specified by Congress, there would be requirement that the appointments made by the president be done with the advice and consent, famous phrase, of the Senate, meaning they had to approve. And, and that's why we see today where we have, they have a confirmation hearings where the senators of the particular committee, in this case, it would be the Senate Judiciary Committee for the Attorney General. They have hearings. They look at everybody's papers from the nominees' papers forever. And they conduct a whole hearing about whether the person is fit. And usually if it's a decent nominee, the person gets through. Unless they're controversial, in which case it could be party line, or they could get rejected, or they get sent to the floor if they're approved, and then there's a floor vote in the Senate. That's the normal process. Donald Trump realizes that he's going to pick some people who may not get even the 50 of the 53 votes that he has, that the Republicans have in this Senate, which means, let's leaving apart filibusters and cloture, which means he can't get someone through. But he wants to appoint people that even, Republicans don't want. So he is trying to avoid that. And there is another provision in the Constitution because, as I said, back in the day, the Senate and the House weren't always in session. You couldn't fly home for the weekend, and there was less to do. So there were many parts of the year when Congress was not in session. In fact, what they do is they'd have, how Congresses, which last 2 years, have two sessions typically, one for the first year of the 2-year period, and then a second in the second year. And that's why when you see a citation for a law, it's like, the 94th Congress first session, and so on and so forth. And that's how, the congressional record is done that way. And so what the framers provided was if the Senate was not in session, Congress was not in session, then the president could appoint someone without Senate confirmation until the end of the next session, temporarily. And this was something that happened from time to time back in the day. And it actually happened in the 60s a bit when Southern senators would refuse to approve certain nominees. For example, Thurgood Marshall, when he was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit by President John F. Kennedy in 1961 or 62, I don't know which. And then he later, Lyndon Johnson appointed him to the Supreme Court. He was originally a recess appointment, but then he was later confirmed. And so it's just a temporary expedient. What Trump wants to do is he wants to manufacture a recess that wouldn't otherwise exist. He wants basically the House and the Senate to adjourn so that the Senate will not be in session. And if the Senate is not in session for more than 10 days, that the president can do a recess appointment. And then that person will, be able to hold the office for a year or more. And that would be, that really requires the cooperation of both houses of Congress. It requires, and in particular, a complete abdication of the responsibility of the Senate to supervise, to give advice and consent over presidential nominations. And the fear is among normal people who believe in the constitutional framework and the idea of advice and consent and the checks and balances. The fear is that the Senate and the House will accede to that, because that way they don't get tagged. The Senate doesn't get tagged with approving these bozos, and Trump gets what he wants. And so Trump is putting pressure on Congress to manufacture a recess. And there's also a little more complicated thing. There's an obscure provision in the Constitution that I don't think ever has been used that permits, in the case of a disagreement between the House and the Senate on when to adjourn and when to end a session, the president can basically adjourn Congress until such time as he deems fit. So, that would require, for example, Speaker Johnson to do, call the House out of session, for example, at a time when the Senate wasn't willing to do it. So he could force, but the problem with that is it's only for there are technical problems with that. But there's all sorts of scheming and speculation about how Trump could get Congress or procure a manufactured recess that would not otherwise exist in order to avoid Senate confirmation of, bozos like Gaetz and Gabbard.
And this, so I got to say, this to me it's one of those things where it doesn't sound unconstitutional. It's more like a norm violation, right? Like it's not supposed to be utilized this way.
Well, interesting. You should ask that question because you're not wrong. I mean, if you look at the provisions, it's not immediately apparent that you cannot do this. But there's a potential argument that was actually highlighted by the very conservative lawyer and former Scalia clerk and National Review commentator, Ed Whalen, friend of mine. Mm-hmm. He points out the following. There was this case that went to the Supreme Court, 10, 15 years ago called NLRB, I think, versus National Labor Relations Board versus, I think, Noel Canning, if I have the case name correct. And what happened was the Congress didn't want presidents to engage in recess appointments. In this case, it was Obama. Okay. And so what the Senate would do and the House would do, I don't know if the House had to do it, but the Senate certainly did, they'd have these when they went away for a few weeks, they would have one senator remain in Washington at any given time to convene a pro forma, purely formalistic session and then adjourn it for that day. And so they gavel in and gavel out. And so that there would never be anything that a president could assert was a recess that occurred. And therefore, President Obama could not recess appoint, I don't know who it was I don't know which nominees they were particularly concerned about at the time. And that got challenged. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yeah, this is okay. It's not really up to us to say what a session or what a session is or what to manage the affairs of Congress. I don't remember what the precise ruling was. But there was a dissent. I mean, not a dissent, a concurring opinion that concurred only in the judgment, not the reasoning. And it was by Scalia, Alito, and Thomas. And they made a very interesting argument, which, Scalia it was a great opinion by Scalia. And he points out that if you actually do some textual analysis of the Constitution and what it means when it says session, and if you look at some historical evidence, a recess is something, and you look at the way that recess and session kind of work together, a recess can only be an intersession recess, not a recess for summer vacation. So in other words, it would have to be a recess between, for example, the end of the Congress that ends on January 3rd and the one that's usually is supposed to gavel in, on January 6th or whatever the dates are. I don't have the dates. Or if they end their business at the end of the first session in the first year of a 2-year Congress, if they went home on December 1st and didn't come back until January, that would be an intersession recess and an actual recess under the Constitution. But if they just decided after having convened the first session of Congress, which they have to do at the beginning of the year under the statute and under the Constitution, and then decided, okay, it's January 20th. Hello, Mr. President, and we have our inauguration. We're going away for 10 days. Do whatever you want. Scalia, Alito, and Thomas said, that's not a recess under the Constitution because we read the text and we do textual analysis and we look at history because we want to know the framers' intent. And so if you accept that argument, which Ed Whalen, my friend, pointed out in National Review the other day, and again in an op-ed, which I commend to people, that he published today in the Washington Post, Trump shouldn't be able to do this until the end of next year. There's another problem with this situation, which is, and this is sort of interesting, there's a federal statute that says that if there's a vacancy in a Senate confirmable position that occurs before the Senate goes out of session, and then a recess appointment is made after the Senate recesses, let's leave apart the intra-session versus inter-session issue, which is a little complicated. That person can't get paid his or her salary until that person is confirmed by the United States Senate. So you could have a situation where if assuming that Scalia et al. Were wrong and then they pulled this stunt and went away for a few days in January or February, and then Trump appointed on a recess basis Matt Gaetz, and somehow that were upheld by the courts, although, you could end up a situation where if the Senate still refused to confirm him, Matt Gaetz wouldn't be able to be paid, and he wouldn't be able to Venmo girls.
Is this the kind of thing where like Elon Musk can just start paying his salary?
No, that would be illegal.
Oh, good.
Under something called a statute called the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is a 19th century thing that basically says that the funding of the government cannot occur from any source other than the government, the Treasury. In other words, I can't pay a soldier's salary, even if I can give money to the Treasury. If I want to pay more I don't think I pay enough in taxes. I could donate money to the government, but I could not pay somebody to work for the government.
Interesting.
That's illegal.
I forgot to mention in my list of new cabinet positions that Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk have a new branch of government called the Department of Government
Efficiency.
And, which
and the
is
running
Doge.
joke
like cryptocurrency.
And the running joke in the Capitol is, well, that's certainly efficient, having two people do one job.
Yeah. What could go wrong, man? What could go wrong?
I mean, there are a lot of things, but there are legal issues with that. One is it's not a real department, so it's not a real thing. And the second is that if it were some kind of something that makes recommendations about government power and conduct and the exercise of executive power, it could be subject to something called the Federal Advisory Committee Act and so on, that would require all sorts of disclosures and procedures. But that's
really, I guess this is the underlying question, which is Trump going to be able to get away with all of this, or do we have a system of government that can withstand what he's trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, these aren't the worst things he could be doing. I mean, the Gaetz thing is off the charts weird and bad. But yeah, I mean, this could be the first test of, whether or not his violation of at least what are constitutional norms and bad faith invocation at a minimum of constitutional provisions and misusing them in ways that the framers didn't intend. Whether, first of all, one question is, does that actually violate the Constitution? And secondly, what will the courts do about it? All right. And so we don't, I think given how clear the position and well-argued position of Scalia, joined by Alito and Thomas JJ, that's how we say it in the law, JJ is plural for judges. You got a couple. You can get some of the libs on to buy onto that, and this scheme will go down. and he'll have to find some other way to control these departments with people who aren't confirmed, which is something he learned how to do during his first term, where you can appoint acting officials, but they have to have there are lots of restrictions on who those acting officials can be. For example, you could have an acting attorney general on day one of your administration, but it would have to be, for example, a U.S. attorney somewhere who's already been confirmed by Congress for that job, and you could then slot that person in. And if there's a Republican somewhere to be found who fits that bill, as there actually was, I think, in 2017, he could do it that way. But those people are not necessarily going to be as reliable as the ones he picks watching TV.
Right. That's right. Reliable for him,
Yes,
not the country,
correct.
the
Not for the
Constitution.
country.
Okay, our second sponsor today is OneSkin. This time of year, I find myself reflecting on the things I'm grateful for, like family, friends, and my health, and this podcast. Another thing I'm grateful for, the fact that I can help my skin stay healthy and resilient as I get older, and thanks to today's sponsor, OneSkin. Their scientifically proven skincare routine has made a noticeable difference in how my skin looks and feels. Their OS1 peptides work at the cellular level to switch off the dysfunctional cells that cause your skin to become dry, dull, and age faster than it needs to. To celebrate the holidays, OneSkin has introduced their limited edition holiday bundle featuring travel sizes of OS1 Face, OS1 Eye, and OS1 Body, all in this chic leatherette bag. It's the perfect gift, but you may actually want to keep this one for yourself. I am keeping mine. Take advantage of this exclusive bundle while it lasts. As a listener, you'll get 15% off using code AskGeorge when you check out at oneskin.co. Invest in your skin's long-term health this holiday season, because healthy skin is a gift. Both George and I use this all the time. I'm so glad to have a travel pack.
An hour or two ago.
In it. Well, you look wonderful. You look wonderful, my friend.
Let me talk about the leatherette.
Yeah, case. Go ahead. You got one too.
I have one. I have a pinkish one and I have a black one.
I just got the black one.
And they're really actually great for toiletries to put in your Toomey bag or whatever.
Yeah. That's right. I've been carrying mine around, and I'm about to go on a trip, and I'm taking them with me.
They're kind of almost like the size of a small football.
That's right. OneSkin is the world's first longevity company. OneSkin addresses skin health at the molecular level, targeting the root causes of aging so skin behaves, feels, and appears younger. It's time to get started with your new face, eye, and body routine at a discounted rate today. Get 15% off with the code AskGeorge at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code AskGeorge. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. We only have one body, one skin, and only you can choose to make it better, age healthy with OneSkin. Okay, so George, I do have one piece of legal news that I want to discuss because this week we were supposed to hear more about Judge Marchand's about the sentencing in the New York trial. Right? Trump was supposed to get sentenced, but Trump's team has asked the case to be dismissed, and the prosecution says it needs time to evaluate next steps now that Trump has been reelected. So the court granted a week's delay. What do you think? What do you think Bragg's going to ask for? Like, what do you think's happening?
I have no idea. I don't. I mean, I can tell you what I would do.
Yeah.
And what if I were the judge, and what I would correlatively, as the prosecutor asked the judge to do, I'd ask him to issue his opinion on whether or not the case should be dismissed. Trump has made this immunity argument. I don't think it should be successful, although it's not completely absurd. He should issue that opinion, and presumably that opinion is going to go against Trump, because if it were for Trump, then Marchand could just issue that opinion today and he'd be done with the case anyway, and there wouldn't be a sentencing. That's one thing. And the other piece of it is the sentencing. And I think the fear is that the problem is that there is a belief, and this is based upon two Justice Department opinions that deal with federal prosecutions or hypothetical federal prosecutions. One was issued one of these opinions was issued by the Office of Legal Counsel of the Department of Justice in 1973. The second one during the Nixon administration. The second one was during the Clinton administration in 1999. No coincidences. It wasn't a coincidence that those two administrations had to confront the potential issue. But they both say that the federal government cannot prosecute a sitting president, cannot indict him, let alone try, let alone convict, let alone sentence. And I happen to think that's not quite right. I think that although it's never going to happen because the Justice Department is subservient to the president, I think you certainly cannot incarcerate a sitting president. And, and if it's true that the federal government can't do that, it's absolutely 100% true that the state cannot do that. A state cannot do that. And so he's never going to serve a prison sentence, even if he is sent to, even if Mershon issues an order sentencing him to 18 months at Rikers. And first of all, and that would be, even if Trump had lost the election, that would have been stayed pending the appeal to the Appellate Division, First Department, and to the Court of Appeals of New York, and then ultimately the Supreme Court if he has a Supreme Court argument. But to go back to this current situation, so it may be a futile act it would be a futile act to sentence him to prison. He's never going to serve that. On the other hand, I'm not sure it's unconstitutional to fine him, assuming that the conviction is lawful and that the immunity doesn't go to the conviction, and that argument is completely separate. It's based on the fact that there was testimony from Hope Hicks, even though it didn't relate to his official duties. I think a fine should be able to stick. And so what I would do if I were Mershon would be I'd issue a sentencing memorandum or decision that sentenced Trump to jail, suspended the sentence because it's clearly not going to be executable, but also fined him. So the conviction, he would still be a convicted felon. And if I'm correct that you can fine you could fine someone who is about to be president but isn't yet president, and for acts that aren't immune and that he committed outside of his presidential duties or prior to being elected, I think that could stick, and then he would be still a convicted felon. I don't want to see the case dismissed. I don't think it's necessary. I think the only issue now is whether or not, he can be sentenced, and to what. And I think what I would do is I would say I would sentence you to 18 months. I'm going to suspend that sentence, or I am going to refrain from that because it's not going to be executable. And here's a fine for whatever the maximum amount is for 34 felony violations of the law that he violated. That's what I would do. That's what I would ask for if I were Bragg. And we'll see if anything approaching that happens. I literally, though, as I prefaced all of this with, have no freaking idea what is going to happen.
Well, we are in unprecedented. Yeah, we're in unprecedented times, and so we've
been in unprecedented times for a while. I think
for a little bit. Yeah, and yet there are still no precedents.
Shouldn't they be precedented by now?
They remain unprecedented.
How can you be unprecedented when it's if it's unprecedented, it's but these things that never happen keep happening. I don't know. Is that precedent?
No, I think it's just what it means when things keep getting worse. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, no, kind of like what Bolton said about Tulsi Gabbard being the worst appointment in the history of the United States of America for about an hour.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's all relative. Yeah. Okay, George, thanks as always for talking about the legal news with me. And thanks to all of you for listening to our show. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Well, George Conway, he's a man with a plan. Got to sit down with Sarah Longwell, take a stand, explain all the legal problems they're piling high. With Donald Trump, oh my, oh my, oh my. He said, Sarah, let me break it down for you. There's obstruction of justice, corruption to the legal tangles and troubles that growing fast. It's a storm that's gonna last and last. Oh, Conway, tell them well all about it. Those legal problems can't live without it. From the emoluments to the Russian ties. Oh, Sarah, listen close.